What if what we call public opinion was just a manufactured narrative that makes it easier to convince people that if their views are different, that there's something wrong with that or there's something wrong with them?
Spending is a tax. As soon as the government spends money, eventually it's a tax. Sometimes we put a direct tax on the people, sometimes we borrow the money, and sometimes we print the money.
Freedom and the dignity of the individual have been more available and assured here than in any other place on earth.
The Patrick Riggins Show. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
Listening to some music sent in by one of the fans of the show. This particular song is by Jason Hodge and entitled, I have to get this title right, Diabolical Man. Not Diabolical Man. Diabolical Man. Obviously a play on diabolical and political. A fitting title giving all that is happening in our government nowadays. You are tuned into the one show making the waves needing to be made. Rocking that boat of American life each week as a proud member of the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network. This is the Patrick Riggins Show, bringing you another hour of broadcast reason, logic, and good old American values upon which this country was built. There are those who are trying to undermine the firm foundation, like termites that are trying to hollow out the foundation of this great country and leave us with a shell of we once were. But I won't let them do that, and you won't let them either. So together we'll fight against these traitors who would rather have government handle every problem than have to face life themselves. And that's fine and dandy as long as they want to move to a country that fits that paradigm. Stop trying to make our country into a bastion of oppression disguised as some sort of bastardized form of freedom and liberty. All right, this week on the show, to start out, I want to ask you just a quick question. And for some of you, you may remember this, and some of you may not. Do you remember the furor that erupted a few years ago when it was discovered that Google was logging Wi-Fi hotspots while the company's cars were out taking pictures for its Street View service? Or the uproar over Apple tracking the movements of their iPhones and then storing that information in a file on the actual device. Now, when this came out, government was demanding explanations. The media was talking about all these invasions of privacy. If I remember correctly, a few countries in Europe even brought up some charges for violations of their privacy laws in those particular countries. Everyone felt like they're being watched. The point I'm getting to is, here we have the NSA doing even worse, violating the Constitution. It is unconstitutional what the NSA, the government, is doing. Absolutely no argument. Now, it's legal. Sure, they passed a law stating that it was okay, but it's not constitutional. I noted that on last week's show. Even had a soundbite from Judge Andrew Napolitano stating the same thing. If you want to hear it, you can go to youtube.com/Patrick Riggins Show if you want to listen to last week's show. But the question is, who wins in this? A law passed by Congress or the Constitution? Now, unfortunately, it seems that Congress and the government win, which is clearly wrong. Where are all the people screaming about this? Where are all the people protesting what the government is doing? And a guy who revealed it all is on the run for his life. You heard it on the news during the break here. Congress and the government want his head. They say he's a traitor. But is he? Is Edward Snowden a traitor for telling us what we needed to know? For pointing out the people in government, our employees, they are betraying us. If there are any traitors in this equation, it's Congress and the government betraying the citizens of this country. What Edward Snowden did was constitutional. He did not violate the Constitution of the United States of America. But what the government and Congress are doing does violate the Constitution. And not just in this case, but practically every day. If I had a 7 days a week show, I still couldn't get to everything the government is doing that is not allowed by our Constitution. Every day, every single day. And Edward Snowden, he's the traitor, the person betraying our country. The only thing he betrayed was the government, the club he was a member of. Everyone in there is doing the same thing, trying to get away with as much as they can. But the federal prosecutors have filed charges against Mr. Snowden. He's the traitor. And you may say, yeah, Patrick, that's awful, but what can I do about it? It's simple. Call your congressional representatives. Demand they get these charges dropped. Demand they stop all this spying on the citizens of this country. You are their boss. If you owned a business and had laid down some rules for how you wanted your employees to behave, would you tolerate it if they didn't follow those orders? If you told your secretary, hey, don't listen to my conversations through my office door, and then you caught them doing it, would you not fire them immediately? What if they said, hey, I'm only listening to see if you might call for help. I'm doing it to keep you safe. Would it be okay then? Oh, sure, if you're doing it for my safety. Oh, go right ahead and listen at my office door. Heck, pick up the phone and listen to my phone conversations. Oh, wait, the government claims they're not doing that. So let's take them at their word, if you can say that without laughing. But let's say your secretary is only writing down every number that calls in and every number you call and how long you talk. Is that okay to do? Because, you see, if they're doing that, then if someone robs you, then the police can go back through all these records to see if maybe the robbers might have called first to find out about your security system or ask about your store hours. So all this information is collected just in case they need it, all for your safety. Would you allow that to happen in your own business or office? If no, then why are you allowing your government or your employees in government to do it? Why aren't you ringing the phones of your representatives off the hook in Washington? Why aren't you flooding their email inboxes with complaints? Go to your congressional representatives' public appearances and ask them to their face what's going on in government, and then demand they do something about it. Don't ask. Don't say, hey, if you got the time, can you check into this? No, demand they do something. If they don't, tell them you'll get them kicked out of office at the next election. Then do it. Don't make an idle threat, because that only emboldens these people. Find someone to run for their seat, even you, and get elected. With the anger people are feeling towards Washington and in government in general right now, this is the perfect time to put together a campaign and run for office. Promise to get government out of everyone's hair. Stop all this spying and violating of our rights. Promise that. And more importantly, do it when you win. Heck, if you're needing publicity, call this radio station, tell them you want to be on my show. WOKI, Oak Kingston Pike here in Knoxville, Tennessee. If you can't get through that way, email us, patrickriggenshow@gmail.com. Sure, the NSA is going to be sucking it into their databases, but you're there already. They're tracking everything you do through your internet provider, so unless you have your own line to the internet backbone, they've got your information. You might as well give those nosy bureaucrats something to do while they sit around taking a paycheck for violating your rights. That email address, again, if you need it, is patrickriggenshow@gmail.com altogether. And Riggins is spelled R-I-G-G-I-N-S. patrickriggenshow@gmail.com. Now, this is a big problem, and no one wants to talk about it. The government wants to divert your attention to the fact that Edward Snowden's a traitor. End of story. That's all there is to it. Nothing to see here. He's a traitor. And hey, look, now we're talking about immigration. That's a hot button issue to distract you from all this spying. Don't you want to talk about that? These evil illegals coming into this country? You better look out. We're going to give them amnesty. We're going to let them stay and take your jobs. Hey, look. See those shiny keys we're dangling in front of you? Pay attention to that and don't worry about these constitutional violations, these invasions of your privacy. What's the real danger here? It's other people in government are watching these scandals to see what happens. Is anyone going to jail? Is anyone really getting in trouble? Or are they just being fired and rehired in another agency or by another company that maybe they're friendly to the government, a defense contractor or a lobbying firm? If no drastic action is taken, if this is just a little summer scandal that's gone by the end of the summer, then what are we telling people who would like to do this same thing? This isn't the first time this happened. The EPA has been trampling people's rights. The DEA, the ATF, the Department of Homeland Security, Justice Department, the Educational Department has been trampling parents' rights. All these agencies continue to do this type of thing because we let them. Oh, sure, we'll be mad for a few months, but we'll get over it. Heck, half this country is on public payroll in the form of government aid. Add to that all the government employees and families of those government employees. With all those people, you think they're going to want to reform government? Do you think they're going to be pressing for the government to reduce the intrusion, the spying it is doing, when these same people are receiving direct government aid, charity, or paycheck, or otherwise? All right, we're up on the first break here on the Patrick Regan Show. Started off strong, and we're going to continue running strong. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about this whole Syrian thing again, because apparently our government just doesn't understand, and unfortunately there's a lot of people in this country who don't either. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on the Patrick Regan Show with a lot more to come. And welcome back to the Patrick Regan Show. A little old school Guns N' Roses there. All right. You know, I've talked about this quite a bit, and during this segment of the show, as I've been noting over the past few weeks, and, well, let me rephrase that. It's really probably since spring of last year, probably sometime around in there, I've been warning you that our government wants to be in Syria so bad it can almost taste it. As I noted just last week, President Obama is saying he wants to send arms to the Syrian rebels. And thankfully, we have some senators who are trying to stop that. They are Senators Tom Udall, I guess, he's a Democrat in New Mexico, Chris Murphy, Democrat Connecticut, Mike Lee, Republican Utah, and, of course, Rand Paul, Republican Kentucky. Now, what they've done is they have introduced legislation that would block military funds from going to Syria. What the legislation states in part is, quote, except as provided under subsection B, no funds made available to the Central Intelligence Agency, the Department of Defense, or any other agency or entity of the United States involved in intelligence activities may be obligated or expended for the purpose of, or in a manner which would have the effect of, supporting directly or indirectly military or paramilitary operations in Syria by any nation, group, organization, movement, or individual. Now, of course, you're going to say, hey, wait a minute, Patrick, what's that exception in the first line of that paragraph? Well, glad you asked. The exception is the prohibition under subsection A, which is what I just read, does not apply to funds obligated for non-lethal humanitarian assistance for the Syrian people provided directly by the United States government through non-governmental organizations or contractors or through foreign governments. Okay, so we are still sending them humanitarian aid. Okay, right. Now, normally on this show, if Rand Paul is arguing for something, it tends to hold water pretty well and seems to be thought out. But I have to make an exception here. And I think it's because these senators are rushing to stop this military aid before it can get started. However, we provide humanitarian assistance all over this globe to all kinds of countries who are led by dictators and regimes, people hostile to the United States. We send this aid, and over, we see it get diverted to help the people who are friends and supporters of our enemies, these leaders who have no love for us. Look at all the money sent for humanitarian reasons to the PLO, which ended up in Yasser Arafat's private banking accounts. When he died, auditors found close to $1 billion hidden away in accounts and investments. $1 billion. While I have no problem prohibiting military aid to the Syrian rebels, which this bill does, it also allows humanitarian aid, which I do have a problem with. Not only because it gets diverted, but it violates a corollary of the long-standing rule here on the Patrick Riggin Show. Taking money from one citizen at the point of a gun and giving it to another in the form of charity is wrong. Now, corollary being taking money from one citizen at the point of a gun and giving it to someone else outside the United States is doubly bad. If Americans want to donate to private charities to help people in Syria, they can. There are many of them, just a Google search away. And unlike the government or the money the government takes, a private charity gives a better accounting of where your money's going, how much is being used for administrative and fundraising functions, and how much is actually going to help the people it's supposed to be helping. Now, speaking of this whole Syria mess, I have some audio from the floor speech given by Senator Ted Cruz this week that I want to play. What it illustrates is the confused and lack of clear direction that is held by, well, probably most of our congressional representatives, not only on Syria, which is what this speech addressed, but on all other issues as well. The interesting aspect of this speech is Senator Cruz gives away his true goals, what really is bugging him about all this. He gives that away right at the first of his speech. Here's the clip from it.
Iran and Russia stand to gain a major strategic victory if Assad remains in power.
There you go. It's just as I told you last week in relation to Senator John McCain's statements. Mr. McCain has stated that we are basically standing on the sidelines while, quote, the Russians are all in and Hezbollah is all in. In fact, here's what I said. Hold on just a second. It's all about fighting those dang Russians again. We have to keep them in check. If they're in a war, then John McCain wants us to be there as well. Here's a little bit of breaking news for old man McCain. Hey, we won the Cold War. Freedom and liberty will win every time if given the chance. But in order for freedom and liberty to prevail, we have to be able to demonstrate it to the rest of the world. Give them something to shoot for. Give their people a goal. There you go. You know, it's killing these people to sit over here in America and watch all these other countries having all the fun meddling in Syria. Here's a news flash for Ted Cruz. The Russians have naval bases in Syria already. That's why they're worried about what's happening. We don't have any bases. We have no business involving ourselves with that country. If a country where we had naval bases or any bases, if that country started melting down, you can bet we'd be involved in it for sure. That's why the Russians are helping. Heck, we're trying to get involved in Syria, and we don't have any bases there. Here's another clip from Mr. Cruz's speech here.
All Americans would like to see secular, democracy-minded forces in Syria come to power.
Really? All Americans, huh? Well, I'm an American, and I really don't care who is running Syria because I don't live there. I'm not going there, and we really don't have any reason to be meddling in Syrian affairs. I'm an American, and I'm fairly certain a large percentage, well, you know, I'd even say a majority of Americans don't want us there either. Which reminds me, real quickly, I have a couple of polls from this week. The first one's a Pew poll, and the question was, would you favor or oppose the U.S. and its allies sending arms and military supplies to anti-government troops in Syria? 20% of the people said yes. So 80% of the people said no. The breakdown on political affiliation was 25% Democrats, 20% Republicans, and 18% independents. Now, 3 weeks ago, Gallup polling asked a similar question, and they got a similar result. Their question was, suppose all economic and diplomatic efforts fail to end the civil war in Syria. If that happens, do you think the United States should or should not use military action to attempt to end the conflict? 24% of people polled said yes to that question, with political affiliations coming in about the same. The Republicans were slightly more likely to approve, a little bit more than the Pew poll, but basically still the same. Now, the reason I mentioned this poll from 3 weeks ago is because this week, Gallup released another poll, but this time they included President Obama in their question. That question was, do you approve or disapprove of the Obama administration's decision to supply direct military aid to Syrian rebels fighting against the government in Syria? And when Obama was included in the question, now all of a sudden, 52% of Democrats were all for it. So they went from 25% that they don't want anything to do with it. Now they're at 52%. All because they want to support their party leader, their guy. Doesn't matter that they obviously disagree with his policy. Doesn't matter we shouldn't be doing what he wants to do. Nothing matters but that cult party loyalty. Now, the Republicans stayed the same. Well, basically 29%. Interestingly, though, the independents jumped to 33% from 18%. A 15-point jump, almost as much as the Democrats. What's that tell you about so-called independents? It tells me they're really liberals, most likely voting Democrat. They say they're independent, but mention President Obama, oh yeah, whatever he wants to do. I agree with that. Violating the Constitution? No problem. Getting involved in foreign wars that don't concern us? Sure. Where do we sign up the suckers to send over? You see, they're not going, but they'll send you and your family, your children. They'll send them into the meat grind of war, no problem. All right, let's take a break here. We're up on the half-hour break here on the Patrick Regan Show already. Just running along here, going out with a little rubber band man. And when we come back, we'll have a couple more clips from Senator Ted Cruz and a little bit more on Syria, and we'll try to hit a couple of more things before we run out of time this hour here on the Patrick Regan Show. We'll be back. Welcome back to the second big half hour of the Patrick Regan Show here on the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network. And both of us are residing currently at WOKI News Talk 98.7 here in beautiful Knoxville, Tennessee. When we left off the last segment, we were talking about Syria and why we don't need to be there, and this obvious cult-like behavior of the people who are in these respective parties, Democrat, Republican, and Independent, which is, I believe, is really Democrat. They just don't like the label, I guess. Want to appear that they're thoughtful and they consider all the options before voting Democrat. So, but as I said with this, these polls are just really telling when you're asking Americans, should we be in Syria? And they're saying no, 80%, 75, 80% are saying no, we don't need to be there. Then all of a sudden, when you say that their particular party's wanting us there, then all of a sudden it's a good thing. And this is the problem. This is the problem we have in America today. This is why, as libertarians, we need to get out there and demonstrate to people that there is another way. There's what's called an American way. It's not Democrat. It's not Republican. It gets us back to what America used to be. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to go back to that. Anyway, we're going to get back to Senator Cruz's speech here that he was giving on the floor. Let's go ahead and just jump right into this next clip here.
Once committed to this path, we risk either being forced to incrementally increase our support or facing the humiliation of losing to either al-Qaeda groups or Assad, or both, which would delight both Iran and Russia. So
we get a little bit of reason here. Senator Cruz accurately states we'll be stuck if we get into this mess, or we'd be defeated with Iran and Russia looking on. Again, here's that Cold War mentality again, but I do agree with his assessment of the situation, though. It is a no-win for us.
President Obama has just announced another $300 million in humanitarian aid for Syria, but only about half of the aid already pledged has been delivered. The other half hasn't because of logistical issues and the challenges of keeping these resources out of the hands of bad actors. How on earth can we expect to deliver guns if we can't even get MREs into the country?
There you go. $300 million. $300 million. Money that's being wasted. And we can't even make sure it's getting to the right people. Just what I mentioned at the top of the last segment. We don't even need to be sending humanitarian aid because it doesn't reach the intended people. But it makes us feel better throwing money at the problem. Hey, Patrick, at least we're doing something to try and feed and care for these people. Who cares if it all isn't getting there? This is the same problem we have in this country. People throwing good money after bad, all in an effort to make themselves feel better, to somehow justify their existence in this world. I'm doing something, Patrick. I'm making a difference. No, you're not. More than likely, just like in this case, you're making the situation worse. It's the same thing when you give money to the people standing on the ramp on the interstate. Oh, yeah, they're going to use it to buy needed medical services. They're going down to the Quick Mart and buying a beer with it. But, gee, it makes you feel better, doesn't it? This drives me crazy when I hear people saying this. At least I'm doing something. Hey, idiot, it's not working. You might as well flush that money down the toilet for all the good it's doing. But I guess it makes you feel better, and that's all that matters. You already feel guilty enough about being successful and living in a country where you don't have to eat bugs or mush or drink dirty water. Sure, feel guilty about all those amenities of living in the United States. You know, if it'll make you feel any better, just turn off your water and dig a well. Not one with an electric pump, a manual pump, the one you got to crank. And get rid of your car, too. If you make it harder on yourself, will you feel better then? Will you stop wasting money trying to somehow buy your redemption? But I'm getting off track there. Anyway, after Senator Cruz goes on in this speech about how we don't need to be intervening militarily in Syria, we don't need to be sending weapons to our enemies, he thinks the time is past for us being able to do something. He comes up with this concerning the weapons of mass destruction in Syria.
We need to be developing right now a clear, practical plan to go in, locate the weapons, secure or destroy them, and then get out.
So we're going into this country. We're going to find and remove or destroy all the chemical weapons there and then leave? That's the plan, correct?
What are you people? On dope?
Don't know. It sure sounds like it, though. Here's a clip from last week's show. We're now getting reports that the Assad government is using chemical weapons. Never mind that this charge has been leveled against the Syrian rebels as well. It all starts sounding like the whole Bush weapons of mass destruction in Iraq storyline again. No one would back that war until we started talking about Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction. There you go. No public support for intervention in Iraq. Oh, wait. Hey, there's weapons of mass destruction there. Now we have to go in. Fast forward to now. No public support for intervention in Syria. Oh, wait. Hey, there's weapons of mass destruction there, too. And, by the way, they've got raping, torture, killing, just like in Iraq. Am I the only one that thinks this is starting to sound like a bunch of children trying to justify their actions with the same story over and over? Are we going to continue to keep buying this? We don't seem to be when we're asked about it in a nonpartisan way. Just look at the polls I mentioned. There's no support until the question is asked in a partisan way. then that supports their blind loyalty to their party leader. Let's just call all parties what they are, cults. They have unwavering support for their leader, no matter which side you're on. Give them all your money. Give them all your support. Give them your vote. Doesn't matter they're violating your rights. They're getting us tangled up in wars and conflicts. Nothing matters but supporting the supreme leader of either party. Now, sometimes that supreme leader isn't a person so much as it's an ideology, in the case that the party's not in power. Real quickly, this next clip, Senator Cruz is talking about how inept the administration has been recently as it pertains to other problems we had in this area of the world.
We are apparently just supposed to trust the president to manage Syria policy more effectively than he has over the last 2 years, and more effectively than he has managed events in Iran, Libya, and Egypt.
This is my problem with this speech. It oscillates back and forth between doing something in Syria and not doing something, staying out of Syrian problems, but criticizing the president for not, quote, managing the problems in Iran, Libya, and Egypt. Now, maybe you can refresh my memory. When did Iran, Libya, and Egypt become states or even territories? Oh, that's right, they're not. Then why are we trying to manage anything in those countries? How many times does it have to be stated? It's none of our business. But Patrick, they have bombs. They're abusing their people. They're killing, maiming, raping, torturing. Yes, you're right. And if you don't agree with it, feel free to head over there and do something about it. But from a constitutional standpoint, we don't have any authority to be going into a foreign country and trying to set up governments. None. Zero. Nada. We're up on the last break here on the Patrick Riggin Show. When we come back, we'll probably stick with this. We have a couple more clips about this Syria, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And, we've got let's see. Yeah, we're apparently charging people who have been fighting over there as well, despite the fact that we are too. So when we come back on the Patrick Riggin Show, join me in about a minute and a half. All right. Back here on the Patrick Riggin Show. A little Earth, Wind, and Fire. This last segment, I want to continue with this whole Syria thing we're kicking around. Just because it bugs me so much that we've got people who are just so willing to go over there and meddle when we don't need to be there. Here's another clip real quick from that speech by Senator Ted Cruz on the floor of the Senate.
During the Green Revolution in 2009, the Obama administration stood by and allowed the supreme leader of Iran to brutally suppress his people as they protested in the streets.
Wow, I didn't know that. President Obama stood right there, I guess he was in Iran, and watched as they brutally suppressed protesters. So, what was the alternative on that? Defend them? That would entail a full-scale military operation, as I'm sure Iran would not be welcoming us with open arms. What are we supposed to do, Senator Cruz? What? Bad things happen in dictatorial countries. Hey, guess what? Bad things happen right here in the United States. We have our own government spying on us in violation of the Constitution. And the guy who brought it all to light is being pursued around the world. While here at home, the government propaganda machine is hard at work trying to, one, convince us this guy is a traitor for telling the government's boss, us, that our employees, the government, is violating our constitutional rights. And B, that all this spying it's been protecting us all along. In fact, it saved lives and prevent attacks. So shut up, stop complaining, and take the oppression like you're supposed to. It's not the government's fault anyway. It's Edward Snowden's. If he hadn't said anything about it, you wouldn't have known about it, and you wouldn't have had all this trouble stirred up. So you Democrats, shut up because it's your president doing it, and you Republicans, shut up because it was your president that got the ball rolling, and you libertarians, well, you just plain don't count since you're for the Constitution, and we'll have none of that. Speaking of Mr. Snowden, this story's been running on the news, and I'm sure y'all have heard about, but in case you haven't, they're reporting an Icelandic business executive has a private plane on standby to transport him from Hong Kong to Iceland. Their government there in Iceland, however, says it has not received an asylum request from Snowden, but the problem is he can only do that if he's in Iceland. So at least Mr. Snowden is now getting some help while trying to stay a step ahead of whoever the United States has looking for him. Hopefully he'll be able to get to Iceland and receive asylum. It's really sad to me, though, that in our supposedly free country, someone exposing government corruption and spying on its own citizens has to seek asylum somewhere else. But getting back to the speech here real quick, here's another clip from Senator Cruz.
President Obama cheered on the demonstrators but refused to take a leading role in helping Egypt make the difficult transition to democracy, opening the door to a Muslim Brotherhood regime that is now taking systematic steps to hollow out that country's fragile constitution.
Oh, aren't we the pot calling the kettle black? They are hollowing out that country's constitution, which is exactly what is happening right here in our country. How about this? Instead of advocating this worldwide intervention in other countries' business, how about we lock down our government first? How about instead of sending money all around the world, having over 700 military bases all over this earth, how about we bring it all home and get our own house in order? Just like I stated on my show last week, we aren't the paragon of freedom and liberty we are supposed to be. We aren't setting a good example of how a free country operates. We have to get our own government under control, get it back within the cage of the Constitution. Once we do that, we'll once again be the ideal, the goal to which the rest of the world aspires. We don't force them to be like us. We give their people a system to emulate. We stimulate their own natural desires to be free. You know, while we're on this subject, those of you who saw this on our Facebook page, it's at facebook.com/Patrick Riggin Show. We noted this, posted this earlier in the week. And if you go to that, be sure and give a shout out to the NSA, who's probably monitoring all of it, along with the rest of the internet. We're working on getting a website completed where we can put all this stuff, but I'm sure they'll be monitoring there as well. That's just how it works. You know, but anyway, we had a ex-U.S. soldier named Eric Haroun, I believe, who allegedly fought aside the Al-Qaeda affiliate, alongside the Al-Qaeda affiliate against the forces of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in the nation's ongoing civil war. And he was indicted by a federal grand jury Thursday on 2 charges of his activities in Syria. And what the charges were charged with conspiracy to provide material support to a foreign terrorist organization and conspiracy to use destructive devices overseas. Now, he faces a maximum sentence of life imprisonment if convicted of the second charge. And what I think is so crazy is the United States government is providing material support to a foreign terrorist organization, the Syrian rebels, and conspiracy to use destructive devices overseas. And we think it's a good thing. But an individual does it, and he gets brought up on charges. Now, he didn't act against the United States, did nothing at all to harm us, but we're charging him for doing the exact same thing we've done in the past. In fact, we're doing it around the world right now, and we want to do in Syria. This is the problem. This is our government being hypocritical, and Congress isn't calling them out on it because our whole dang government's like this. And it's really our fault for letting it get out of control, which is why I'm here to try and motivate you to do something. Anyway, we're up on the last here of the Patrick Riggin Show. If you want more information about us, as I said, go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Patrick Riggin Show. And you can also go to our archives at our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Patrick Riggin Show. Thank you for listening again this week. And join me next Saturday afternoon at 4, where we'll be fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.
Join us again next week for a solid dose of truth on the Patrick Riggin Show.